Hello again and welcome to the 140k Imperial Guard Tactics video. Now before we get into today's video, I would like to say a huge thank you to Brandon BT for sending in these awesome pictures of his Cadian Hostile Environment Suit Plasma Veterans. These guys look absolutely fantastic. Love the Cadian Hostile Environment stuff. Can't wait to I've actually got a little command squad of these guys myself, which I'm going to hopefully get painted up as part of maybe 3rd, maybe 4th platoon for the Mordian 50th Rifles. We'll have to see. But anyway, thank you for sending these pictures in, Brandon. They look absolutely fantastic. Really like the classic scheme. Really like the plasma guns. If anyone else has got any cool pictures, or I should say really like the little conversions on the barrels of the las guns as well. Very big fan of that. But if anyone else has got any cool pictures they want me to use in my videos, please post them on my Facebook page. There will be a link down in the description below. Now, continuing with this week's theme, apparently of me wishing things were different, how Mordian Glory would right the wrongs of the world, we are going to be taking a look at Vox Casters and how to fix the rules for Vox Casters. Now, at the moment, and in fact for a while now, feels like through all of 8th edition at least, Vox Casters have been poop. And it's a real shame because loads and loads of people who get into the Guard for the first time love building their squads of Vox Casters because it's really cool having a radio guy in your squad, right? Why wouldn't you want one? It's a cool little bit of kit. But after a few battles of paying the points and them not doing as much, I mean, that's kind of changed in 9th edition Vox Casters. I'm starting to put one in a lot of squads because they seem to be kind of useful with keeping my officers alive. But most players, after a while of playing with the Vox Casters, they stop paying for them and they just become fancy little bits of modelling stuff on your regular old rifleman. Can't tell you the amount of times that I have used it and the amount of times I've seen it on the battlefield. Big conscript blobs, and there's like 5, 6, 7 Vox Casters in there because they're just being used as basic riflemen to fill out conscript squads. Happens all the time. Why does it happen? Well, that's because the Vox Caster doesn't really do a huge amount for a lot of Guard players. Now, in a pure infantry army like mine, and with things like 9th edition, got to keep my officers safe at the backfield, but still want to do orders, Vox Casters are kind of coming back into things with 9th edition, but for a lot of Guard commanders, they're totally useless. Most Guard commanders will still go into battle with just 6 infantry squads because you want to keep your 1 battalion. That's not really enough. You want about 100. But, you know, most Guard commanders are going to go into battle with some infantry. And so they don't really get a huge amount of those out of those Vox Casters because they'll just have an officer sitting nearby to babysit them. So they need a bit of reworking. And also taking out that their apparent usefulness maybe in certain Guard builds, they just kind of don't work the way that you imagine them to work. Back in the day, what Vox Casters used to do is you could use them to project your warlord's leadership across the whole battlefield. It was really cool. So this was before orders even existed. So before orders existed, what used to happen is you could take Vox Casters in your squads for like 5 points, or they were called comlinks back then, and you could then take a master comlink in your company command squad, or I don't think it was called company command squad back in the day, senior command squad or whatever. Can't remember now. It's been a while. And what that allowed you to do is it didn't matter where your officer was on the battlefield, a unit could use his leadership, and that represented the radio having a long range. Well, I think we should bring something similar back like that, not in terms of the leadership, but the ability for the Vox Caster to be able to affect much bigger parts of the battlefield. Because to be totally honest, 18 inches is not really a long enough distance for a big backpack Vox Caster kit like we see on these guys. Now, I know there'll be many military experts and maybe even serving members of the military who watch this channel. I do have quite a few of those chaps, and correct me if I'm wrong here, guys, but I know that you have headsets and shortwave radios for like inter-squad communication or intra-squad communication within the unit and within the platoon. But I also know that a lot of platoons at least have, or a lot of squads have, one guy with a long range radio. I think is it like the longbow radio for the UK Armed Forces? Anyways, you know what I mean. The point is that they have long range radios. And why do they have long range radios, guys? Because they use them to call in support. Amongst other things, they use them to call in support, to be able to, you know, communicate with back in base. You know, when they need like a medevac, or they need to call in some supplies, they don't have a short radio that does that. They don't send a runner back. They don't have a communication telephone with, you know, the wire leading all the way back to base. Often they will have a big radio that will let you do it. You call back to base for your reinforcements, or for your medevac, or for your supplies, or for your air support, or your artillery support. That's what the big radio is for. And a lot of, and you know, from what I understand, a lot of squads that will have this on the squad level, because you know, what if your squad is out on patrol and you get contact? You need that long wave radio, don't you? Right? Long range radio, long range. I'm not sure the precise term, but the point is that's what I believe the Vox Caster should do as well. I would be willing to pay more points for a Vox Caster. It's 5 points currently. I'd be willing to pay up to 10 points for a Vox Caster if it could do a variety of really important battlefield roles. Really important. So one of the things that I think Vox Caster should do straight away is you shouldn't have this 18-inch range on your orders. Okay, if you've got a Vox Caster, bear in mind you could be paying up to 10 points for this. If you've got a Vox Caster and the officer is near a Vox Caster, then there should be infinite battlefield range. Okay, now I will caveat this by saying I would find it acceptable and balanced, and a good reason for command squads to come back, if the regular Vox Casters in the squad could only receive orders, or only had a limited range, but that each command squad could take a master Vox, and that is what the officer could use to have unlimited range. That, I think, would be a very simple way of A, making command squads more relevant, B, making Vox Casters more relevant. If nothing else changed, and that was that, and they stayed at 5 points, that would be the bare minimum that I would like to see. The return of the Master Vox in the command squad. Couple that with the command squad rules that we've covered already, or on the Fixing the Rules series, where you don't make them targetable. I think that would be really cool. So that's the first thing. But let's go further. I think that Vox Casters should be used by infantry to be able to coordinate artillery strikes. Okay, what do I mean by this? Okay, well, right now we have a unit called the Master of Ordnance, who has a rule. He can call in an artillery barrage once per game. He can call in an artillery barrage. It's quite a good artillery barrage. And now with Psychic Awakening, you can make it a full strength one. Blah blah blah. It's really good. But that's not the main reason you should be taking him. That's what the reason why most of us do take him. But the main reason you should take him is he has an aura effect of he rerolls 1 to hit for artillery that's near him. However, the unit the artillery is shooting at has to be at least 36 inches away, 36 inches or greater, which means in 9th edition that's a terrible rule, totally terrible. Because the boards are so small and everyone monster mashes over the centre of the board, you're pretty much always going to be within 36 inch range. And there's better ways of getting a reroll 1 to hit. Katachans can just take Harker. You've got Yarrick. Cadian ones just stay still. It's just stupid. So, what I think you should do is the Master of Ordnance should just let you... Master of Ordnance, look at that guy's backpack. He has a Vox Caster. If you look at the official model produced by Games Workshop, he has a big old Vox Caster on his back. Right? You know what that means? That means he should be able to coordinate with infantry squads to call in those artillery barrages. So what you do is you have the Master of Ordnance, and he gives reroll 1s to hit to those artillery units. But how you get it to work, and I'm trying to think of how to explain this, is like what you want to do is you want to have your massive ordnance, okay, and you want to have a basilisk, a massive ordnance, and an infantry squad. One of the abilities the infantry squad should be coordinate artillery strike, and if that infantry, if the guy with the Vox can draw line of sight to an enemy unit, and then he can coordinate the artillery strike on that unit. So he designates the unit. His Vox Caster can't be used for anything else that turn. Okay, so he can't receive orders as well. No, he can designate the enemy unit. He's busy talking on the Vox Caster that turn. He can't be receiving orders at the same time. Okay, so a bit like a marker light, right? You get into line of sight and you mark the enemy target. Then, if you have a basilisk shooting at that enemy unit, and it is within 6 inches of a massive ordnance, then it gets to reroll once to hit. Doesn't matter if it's minimum range, maximum range, doesn't matter. It gets to reroll once to hit because they've coordinated, they've called in. Grid Kilo 235 is hot. Recommend artillery strike on blah blah blah, and they've called it in. And it's more accurate. They're not just firing blind. They're not just firing based. They've been given grid coordinates by the Vox Caster guy. He's relayed it back to the massive ordnance. The massive ordnance has relayed it to the basilisk, and the basilisk can have reroll once to hit. Easy peasy. Okay, cool. That means you have a way of making the Vox Caster have more battlefield functionality. You have a way of making the Master of Ordnance more effective, and you have a way of making those basilisks, which don't quite have the damage output that they should have, do more damage. Now you should be able to apply this to wyverns, of course, and you should be able to apply this, I would even say, to mortar teams. Why not? Mortar, heavy weapon teams armed with 3 mortars, they should get it. And of course, manticores, wyverns, basilisks, any artillery, they should be able to. Got a massive ordnance, got a Vox Caster, boom. That's one way of doing it. I think that's an easy way. Doesn't mean you have to do it, but I think that's a really good way of allowing the Vox Caster to coordinate in some kind of, some sort of artillery strike. Likewise, okay, you could do something very similar with the Officer of the Fleet. You wouldn't even need, you could have, if there's an Officer of the Fleet near a Valkyrie, or you could just not have give the Officer of the Fleet another battlefield role, okay, and instead, if you have an infantry squad, the Scions have something similar to this now, where they get to coordinate some sort of strafing run. But I think if you've got a guy with a Vox Caster, you've got a Valkyrie, I think that the Vox Caster guy should be able to light up the target. Again, you could only do one of these abilities per turn. I think you should only be able to do one ability per turn, okay? And you can light up that target, and then when a Valkyrie does a strafing run against it, you could have +1 to hit. You could have reroll 1s to hit. I'm not too fussed on how you work it. You can have reroll 1s to wound if you want to. I really don't mind. My point is that you have someone on the ground who does the spotting, and what he can then do is coordinate with the artillery, or he can coordinate with the air force, and he's calling in an airstrike. He's calling in a mortar bombardment. He's calling in a basilisk bombardment. Okay, and it gives you, a better reason to take these Officer of the Fleets, or to take these Valkyries, or these other aeronautical units. It gives you a reason to take the Master of Ordnance outside of being a one-shot basilisk. And it makes the Vox Caster feel like it's a Vox Caster. Now, whether you want to give it reroll 1s to hit, you want to give it +1 to hit, if you want to make the Vox Caster cost 15 points or 10 points, but it's giving my artillery a +1 to hit, that's pretty good. Now, one other thing that I think the Vox Caster should be able to do, okay, which I think is a good idea, is it should be able to call in an off-map bombardment. Okay, now that might sound crazy, but hear me out. Okay, it doesn't have to be like a really powerful off-map bombardment. We're not talking the same things like a Master of Ordnance, but you should have the ability where a guardsman can get on the horn and call in like a light mortar barrage. You know, he has, you know, if you want to call in like a serious heavy bombardment, you need to be some sort of master of ordnance. You need to be a company commander. But if you're, you know, a sergeant on the front lines and you can see enemy units coming towards you, you should be able to have the jurisdiction, the I don't know what you call it, the permission, the level of permission, the security clearance, the clearance to call in supporting light strike. Now, I would have this simply as like a mortar strike. I'd have this as a mortar strike. I would say, you know, if you imagine you're paying 10 points for this Vox Caster, okay? Now, the guy, when he's doing one of these abilities, shouldn't be able to use his lasgun as well. Because he forgoes the use of his lasgun to call in one of these strikes or to coordinate one of these things. But the reason why I think that it's important that the Vox Caster can do this is because it means, like, well, there will be times when you don't run basilisks in your army. There will be people that don't run Valkyries in their army, but they want a reason to be able to pay, you know, 5, 10 points for this Vox Caster. And if that Vox Caster not only can, you know, receive orders from the Master Vox, but if it can also, you know, also be used as an offensive weapon, that'd be great. So I'm more than happy, say, you know, if the squad can't move that turn because he's calling in the strike, and it's D6 mortar shots, literally, but it's not a heavy weapon because, you know, I suppose if you're staying, you know, because the guy himself isn't moving, but I would almost have it as like either where they can do it on the jog, or they can do it as long as they haven't advanced, or maybe they have to stay still. I don't really mind, but the point is that I think that he should be able to, the mortar should be able to call in, and this could be every turn. Or it could be once per game. I don't mind. It's going to get, if it's once per game, it's going to get tricky, though, isn't it? But I think, you know, having the ability for a Vox Caster to be able to call in this mortar strike would be really, really good. Now, you could get creative with this and say, well, each one of these abilities maybe can only be used once per turn. So once per turn, you can, you know, a guy with the Vox Caster, if you've got 20 in your army, they can always. I think they should always be able to be used for orders. Always. Okay. I also think a commissar could potentially project his leadership down one as well. I think, you know, that would be a good, you know, good way of having, you know, a command squad with a commissar. The commissar can project his leadership down. You know, the officer gives orders to the commissar gives bombastic speeches down. I think that's a really good way of doing it. And also, you know, that's another thing I've just thought of now. But I also think, so they should be able to do that constantly. I think if you're going to add in these extra abilities, I would have them as a once per turn. So once per turn, a guy with a Vox Caster can call in a light artillery strike. Once per turn, a guy with a Vox Caster. So even if you've got 10 Vox Casters, if one guy calls that artillery strike in, the others can't. Because I think otherwise, you could have a lot of people turning up with just loads and loads of Vox Caster squads and almost running around with, you know, like a mortar that doesn't have a to-hit penalty. But I suppose you'd have to draw a line of sight though, wouldn't you? It's like a line of sight mortar. So it's not too bad when you think about it. If it's 10 points for this thing and it's light and it shoots a mortar shell, but you have to be able to draw a line of sight. You know what? I think you should be able to do that across every squad, every turn. I don't see a problem with that. You've got to be able to draw a line of sight. That's what I would say. You could, if you wanted, again, link that through the Master of Ordnance. I think it's getting a bit complicated at that point, though. But you could link it to the Master of Ordnance. So as long as you've got a Master of Ordnance on the field, he can relay all the. He can either be buffing the artillery around him, or he can be relaying all the light artillery strikes requests coming in. I think that's a good way of looking at it. But I think, you know, I think that would be a really good way of adding additional functionality to the Vox Caster without making it totally broken. I'd rather have reroll ones to hit than to have +1 to hit, because +1 to hit makes guard units really, really good. It's why tank commander's so powerful. But rerolling ones to hit is very easy for the guard to get, you know, Cadian. But despite that, you see armies like Katachan smashing Cadian in the competitive scene time and time again. Reroll ones to hit isn't such a big deal. It's a nice little buff for the guard, but it's not broken. Anyway, those are my ideas for fixing the Vox Caster. What do you guys think down in the comments section below? Please leave me lots of ideas, lots of comments. Have you got any ideas how you would fix the rules not only for the Vox Casters, but for other units out there? Let me know what you think down in the comment section below. Thank you for listening, and of course, I'll see you guys next time.